Welcome to the City Council extended study session for January 13th, 2020. Our first order, well, we have Councilmember Janice attending remotely from Washington, D.C., where she's at a conference. And the first order of business is to actually amend the agenda. So we're going to remove the fire prevention activity update, if there's a motion to do that.
So moved.
Okay, all those in favor of amending the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay. So the agenda is amended.
Yeah.
Okay, next we have written and oral communications. Time allowed shall not exceed 30 minutes. Speakers will be called in order from the sign-up sheet. If the number of speakers signed up to speak exceeds the 30-minute period, the chair is authorized to give preference to one person speaking to items on that meeting's agenda or anticipated to come on the agenda within 1 month, or two persons who have not spoken to the council in the last quarter. A maximum of 3 persons are permitted to speak on each side of any one topic, and everybody gets 3 minutes. And once the light turns red, your 3 minutes is up, and I will ask you to conclude your comments. So who do we have signed up? Anybody?
There are no signed up speakers.
Okay, do we have anybody here who's come to speak? Okay, we'll move through that. So the first thing on our agenda is our King County countywide planning policies. Brad, did you want to
Sure, thank you.
introduce that?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor and Council members. Just by way of background, the King County Growth Management Planning Council approved a number of amendments to the countywide planning policies regarding school sightings in the urban growth boundary. These amendments are now ready for adoption by the King County Council, but must first be ratified by a certain percentage of cities. So tonight, staff are going to quickly provide council with an overview of these policy amendments and is seeking council direction on whether or not to approve these and bring them back on the consent agenda for the council at a future meeting. So these amendments are being recommended by the staff as well as our liaison on this committee, Councilmember Robertson. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our staff, Emil King.
Yep. Thank you. Mr. Matz and I provide the staff support for the King County Growth Management Planning Council. This body does very good work at a regional level, and periodically it does need to come back to the Bellevue City Council for ratification. This topic, as City Manager Miyake stated, is school siting best practices. So there's a set of 10 best practices in your packet. And as you noted, Mr. Miyake, Councilmember Robertson was our city representative on this effort as it went through the Planning Council. So with that, I did want to allow Councilmember Robertson to make any comments before we turn it over to Mr. Matz.
Sure. I just want to give some context to the council about this item. So the whole school siting countywide planning policies came about. Boy, they've been pending for, I can't remember what it said in the packet, 4 or 6 years. What was happening was school district, not Bellevue's because that's completely urban, but school districts which serve rural areas or which are on the edge of the urban growth areas were often finding it cheaper to buy land, or maybe they already own land in the outside the urban growth area boundary. So because it's cheaper, they were wanting to build schools there. But when you build a school, it has to be on sewer under the standards, and so there's a policy against extending sewer to the unincorporated areas outside the UGA boundaries. And so there was a policy in the past to allow what's called tightlining of the sewers, but then there's people out there who then want to hook up to the sewer, and it tends to spur more growth. So there was an effort several years ago to not allow schools to build in the outside the urban growth boundary, and there's schools that have investments that didn't want to do that. And so this policy came about as a way, as a middle ground solution to make sure that we can plan for schools in the urban areas inside the UGA lines, and that they're working with the local permitting jurisdictions to make sure that we can do that and do it in a way that's efficient, so that the areas outside the UGA boundaries wouldn't be as appealing and wouldn't drive the growth outside the UGA lines. So that's the context on this. It has been pending for a long time. There was a work group, and it did pass with Bellevue's support at the Growth Management Planning Council. And so I'll let Nicholas handle any questions, but I would support either approving it or just not denying it and allowing it to take effect at the county level. Because we either need to specifically approve it or just do nothing, in which case it takes effect. Thanks.
So, Mayor, members of the council, my job was just done for me. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. No. That's exactly what we're talking about here, a continuation of longstanding policy work at the regional level and having some success in regards to relationships between school districts and growing communities and trying to figure out a way through this. And I think the work that Councilmember Robertson done and the GMPC has done has walking us more and more towards a truly collaborative effort. These 10 best practices are adding to existing policy work that gives that guidance out to there. As we laid out for you in attachment B, we are already doing a lot of that, and I'm grateful that the Bellevue School District is here tonight because we do have a very good relationship with them from a planning standpoint as well as a regulatory standpoint, and so certainly encourage you to provide us the direction that you see fit for the ratification effort.
Are there any comments or questions? Jennifer, did you have anything more you wanted to say?
No, I guess I was unclear from the direction. Is staff recommending that if council's comfortable that we actually make a motion to approve it or direct that to be brought back on our next consent?
Second one, we will bring back a resolution for consent on January 21st.
Perfect, okay, thank you. No, I'm good, I'm supportive of that, and I'm happy to answer any questions if people have any.
I'm going to go down like in a circle here, so Councilmember Barksdale. Okay, Councilmember Stokes.
Yeah, I'm support the motion.
Okay, Councilmember Lee.
I'm all for it.
Councilmember or Deputy Mayor Neuenhouse. Excuse me, I introduced you wrong today.
Oh, that's okay. No worries.
It's a new role.
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely. No, I'm supportive of it as well. Happy to make the motion as well.
Councilmember Zahn, do you have any questions or comments?
I support it as well, thank you.
Okay, and I do as well. So if there's a motion,
I'll make a motion. I move that we bring this back on consent for ratification next time.
Second.
all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Okay, great. We'll see you next time.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, the next thing up is our informational presentation on the Bellevue School District's proposed ballot measure.
So thank you, Mayor and council members. Just by way of background, the Bellevue School District has placed a $675 million capital bond measure on the February 11th election ballot to do a number of things, including 1, to rebuild 3 aging schools, 2, to fund safety and security improvements, 3, to purchase property for future school locations. This bond measure replaces one that was placed back in 2014. Tonight's presentation is informational only, and no formal action is being requested by the council this evening. The purpose is really to learn more about the measure as well as to ask questions if you have any with regard to the measure itself. Joining us this evening is Dr. Ivan Duran, the Bellevue School Superintendent, as well as Melissa DeVita, the Deputy School Superintendent. I know you've also brought another guest, and I'll let you introduce that individual. And Joyce Nichols, our Intergovernmental Director, is also at the table to answer any questions on this matter. So with that, I will turn it over to the school district.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Robinson, City Council, and City Manager Miyake. It's a pleasure to be here tonight. I am here with our Deputy of Operations and Finance, Melissa DeVita. We also have Michael May, who was our Communications Director with us back here, and Michael Chen, who is one of our parents in our community and organizing a lot of work for us with this bond. I'm going to just briefly give you an update on the school district, and then we're going to spend most of the time talking about the upcoming proposal that we are presenting to the community in February. So, oh, there you go. Very good, thank you. So, we are in the second year of a strategic plan that we launched, and we have really been doing a lot of work to ensure that we are meeting the needs of all of our students here within the Bellevue School District. We have a new vision, mission, and set of values, and the mission is really designed to be an aspirational mission that's based off of what we heard from so many of our students and community members around really some of the big things that they wanted to see in their educational system in ways that they wanted to feel affirmed and inspired and really think about how they could be creators of their future world. our mission is designed to really set the purpose for our work, and we have intentionally designed it so that we have a lot of emphasis on really providing courageous support to our students, because we know that different students in different situations have different needs, and we want to ensure that all of our students have success. And then finally, we have a set of new shared values that we have incorporated into the district, and we are doing a lot of work in the district on culture. And I'm just a firm believer that there is intentional culture and there's unintentional culture. And we really want to set an intentional culture within the school district, within our community, and really make sure that we're doing a lot of work to honor and recognize our employees in the district. So these 6 set of values were done in collaboration with our school board and our community. We gathered a lot of different information. When we were creating this strategic plan, we had over 4,000 members of the community give us feedback and information on what we could use to drive our plan that we were going to create. But these values are really the basis of a lot of the work that we are doing. We launched a values-based leadership program for all the leaders in our school district. We were able to get all of our central office leaders and school leaders through a 3-day training program to really help them understand what their why is and what they do on a day-to-day basis, and then use these values to really ensure that they are leading from a really central place that is clear about what they're trying to accomplish with their own vision. And we also have a set of priorities. We have 6 priorities that we incorporated into our strategic plan. These are very important for us to ensure that we are not only paying attention to academics around high quality instruction with our students, but there was also a really strong need for us to ensure that we are meeting the social and emotional needs of our students also. So we're doing a lot of investment to ensure that our students have all their needs met. The culture part is huge. We're focusing on our staff, because we know our staff are just central to the work that we do every day, and then incorporating our family and community as much as possible. And then we also have one around organizational alignment, because as with any organization, there's always opportunities to improve our systems, really focus on continuous improvement, ensure that what we do on a day-to-day basis is in best service of our students. And so that's just a really brief update on the district. We're excited about the work that we're doing. We maintain our high graduation rate. This last year was about a 93% graduation rate. You know, we still lead the state, on state exams and doing wonderful work on the academics, but we also know that we have to also find that balance, ensure that we're meeting the needs of our students in all the ways that they come to us, and ensure that we're helping them be prepared for every day. So I'm going to hand it over to Melissa, who's going to share with you more about our facility needs and the work that we're going to be incorporating into our bond.
Thank you, and good evening. Thank you for having us this evening and giving us this opportunity. So we started back in the early 2000s looking at our facilities, and at that time, we had been doing a lot of ongoing maintenance work for our buildings, and we were looking at Phantom Lake Elementary School, and they did a cost basis study, cost analysis on it, and they decided that when looking at it, they figured out that it would only cost about $500,000 more to knock down the structure and rebuild it than it would to make all the changes they would need to make to get it up to code. And at that point was when the board decided to start moving forward with a rebuilding program. So this is the 4th phase of that ongoing construction program that started back in the early 2000s. In the early 2000s, we were really focused on making sure kids stayed warm, making sure that they were safe in their environment, and making sure that they were dry. The world has changed pretty darn significantly since then, and now we really focus on many other things. We're focusing on student safety at a much broader level. Because of all the school violence and other things that have happened, our world has changed. Capacity, back in the early 2000s, we hadn't been growing for over 20 years as a district. Since about 2014, we started growing, and we've been growing the last 6 years, the majority of it coming after 2016. And we anticipate that to continue to happen as the community continues to change. Also, the focus of the instruction has changed. Who would have thought in the early 2000s that we would have kids participating in worldwide robotics competitions and building out these robots and needing spaces to do all of that? And frankly, our positive learning environments, we've realized, have a big impact on students and how they feel when they walk into school and their achievement. So the world has changed, and this is kind of where the focus is now. It's a much broader focus. So Back in the spring of 2018, we put together a growth and planning advisory group. It had parents on it, it had community members, it had a representative from the planning department at the city on it, and it had some of our administrators on it. And that group was asked to look at all of our facilities and our programs and to assess how well our facilities meeting our program needs. And what would be their recommendations moving forward. Their recommendations came to the board and they fell into different categories. Some of them were program adjustments. Do we have our programs in the right locations? Some of them were investing our capital and tech levy, which is funding that we already receive from our community, and how we should better spend that to meet the needs of our students. And then the third area was really around this bond proposal. So they came with different recommendations, not all of them requiring us to go to our voters and ask for greater funds. The bond proposal was presented to the board in the committee's results were presented to the board in October, and then this bond proposal was presented to the board in November, where they decided to go forward with this February election. So we have 3 schools that we are looking at rebuilding: Big Picture School, International School, and Jingmei School. Big Picture School is over 60 years old. It does not have the facilities necessary for that program. For example, they have no gym. They use an old classroom as their changing facility for PE, which happens outside all year round. They also have external walkways, which is something that we are trying to get away from a safety and security perspective. And then it really is a growing program and needs some additional space for that program. International School, I'm sure you're familiar with. That is a building also that we haven't really done anything major to in a number of years. It is a brick building, and while we've brought it up to seismic code as much as we can, it is not up to the current seismic code and needs to be looked at there. It also has one of those entrances where you walk in and you are out in the middle of the student population. So it really just is wide open to anybody who wants to visit that school. And then the last school that we're looking at rebuilding is Jingmei Elementary. This is our last elementary school that needs rebuilding. It too is that old outdoor hallway pod structure. And so really from a safety and security perspective, we like our campuses to be enclosed. We also have 2 high schools that were part of, that were part of an earlier renovation. We redid Interlake back in 2005 and Newport High School back in 2007. And you know, one of the questions we get is, why are we revisiting these schools? You've already taken care of them. But as I said earlier, we were not growing then. And in fact, it takes somewhere around 2 years to really get through the design and permitting process. And so back in those early 2000s, we had been flat in enrollment for pretty much close to 30 years. Since then, about 5 years after these schools were completed, 5 to 7 years after they were completed, that's when we started seeing enrollment growth. And so today, Newport High School, if you have an opportunity to go there during the day, you'll see kids having lunch sitting on the floors and in the hallways, and the hallways are packed. And we have 11 portables, for example, at Interlake High School, and they call it the Portable Village. So it's there's definitely a capacity need at those schools. And those schools, Interlake in particular, we anticipate continuing to be impacted. So you all know what is going on with that whole Bellevue corridor with the light rail coming in there, how that is going from light industrial now to much more residential. And because it was light industrial previously, we didn't have schools located to support that area. I mean, we supported anybody who lived there, but it just wasn't the quantity where you would have a school located in that neighborhood. Now, as it becomes more residential, schools like Interlake High School, Highland Middle School, which is currently under construction, but if you go by there, you see how much bigger it is, are going to have to support students that move into that area. And so that's another reason to make sure that we get Interlake taken care of. And that's also the reason why there is property the purchase of property on this bond, because as we transition the use of different areas of our city, like the Wilburton area, for example, the Bell Red Corridor, we need to make sure that we can have schools located for those families. We are also doing quite a bit of work around the STEM efforts. So STEM being science, technology, engineering, and math. And as I said earlier, who would have thought we'd have students participating in global robotics competitions or rocketry competitions? And none of our high schools right now, with the exception of Sammamish, because it's so much newer, have space really for kids to work on these. So you have the students at Newport High School coming over to our offices, the ESC over on Main Street and First there, working in the garage on their robotics programs. We have kids from International School actually going to location in Redmond, which, you know, is an equity issue. It requires kids to find transportation after school to get to those programs and to really participate. And so we want to add those types of spaces to our schools so that all kids can participate in those types of extracurricular activities. We are also hardening our school entrances. We have been building, as I said, schools for about 20 years. 8 of our schools do not have the security vestibules where you go in after the bell has rung, and it forces you to go through the office and to check in and register before you enter the main part of the building. We also don't have bollards or those safety posts in front of many of our schools, 19 school entrances. Those are the posts that keep vehicles from driving through the front entrances into buildings. And so we want to get those added and continue to protect our students in the world that we live in today. Our education service centers, which are located over across the 405 freeway from here, also need to be updated. Those buildings are almost 35 years old. The envelope on those is failing. So even though they look like nice, shiny black buildings, they are wood structure underneath and are starting to leak and those types of things. And again, we did a cost-benefit analysis on those in terms of, do we work on maintaining them, work on the envelope and all of those things, or do we rebuild them? And really, frankly, we'll get more efficient space. We can add community space, meeting spaces and other things, and it would cost about the same amount of money to either maintain and update them or to rebuild them. And they're also built in a time frame where the ceilings aren't high enough to get all the requirements in, like the fire safety systems and things like that. So we'd have those 7.5-foot ceilings in those buildings. So they're just not in a place where we can meet all of the standards required of construction today. And then I talked a bit about the need to purchase future land because of the changing use of our community. You know, the last thing I want to mention, and I know that you are all fully aware of this, but in the next 15 years, I've seen the numbers that they expect 16,000 new housing units to be built. And while many of those will be multifamily housing units, and we do get the majority of our kids from single-family homes, that sheer quantity will result in enrollment growth. So even if you're getting, you know, 1 child per 10 units, you're still talking 1,600 additional students. And so that is part of the reason, just the growth of our community and the growth of those housing units are driving some of the need for us to make sure that we can meet the needs of our community moving forward. One of the big questions is always, what is this going to cost me? So this capital bond will maintain our current tax rate for the Bellevue School District. There is a small increase of 3 cents per 1,000 is what we are currently anticipating. We have been buying bonds for the past 20 years, and so The maturity of a bond, the maximum maturity of a bond is 20 years, and so we are constantly paying off principal and interest on those outstanding bonds. When we go to the community and we ask them to approve bonds, we're really asking them for a credit limit. Can we borrow $675 million for these projects? We don't go the next day and sell all those bonds, so they don't immediately see a huge tax increase for us to pay all that. We will sell them over a 6 to 7 year time frame, and then use those funds as we move forward. And at the same time, we will continue to pay off the outstanding bonds. And so we bundle them so that we can maintain a flat tax rate. The state does not fund construction projects. There is some money set aside by the state for school construction. It is given to district on a grant process, and it generally goes to the neediest districts in the state, and there's 279 districts in the state. So it's just not a lot of funds available for that. So we're looking at the total cost to be 3 cents per 1,000 on an $850,000 home. That impact would be about $26 a year, $213 a month. It would maintain our tax rate below $2.50 per 1,000, and it keeps us as one of the lowest local tax rate districts in the state and in this area. That is pretty much it. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Joyce, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Not really. We have with us tonight our city attorney, Kathy Gerla, who would like to speak to you about how it is council can proceed from here in terms of not running afoul of the public,
With our
disclosure.
questions and comments.
Right.
Okay, so
And
we'll
that
do
there
that
are
before
options
we.
for you to consider about moving forward and how you might do that.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you.
Good evening, council members. Because this is a ballot measure, there is a possibility for the council, to take a position, a collective position on this ballot measure, should it choose to do so. And at that point, the council will be able to talk about whether you would support or oppose the ballot measure. But in order to do that, you'll need to have that up at a subsequent meeting, and the agenda will need to indicate the ballot title and name of and number of the ballot measure, and we'll need to provide notice to both sides, people who may want to support or oppose the ballot measure, and give them opportunities to speak in support or opposition, as well as individuals. So this is a process the council has done before for the Parks levy or the EMS levy, so that would be done at a future meeting. Tonight, you're free to ask factual questions if you have factual questions about what this measure does or doesn't do.
Okay, thank you. So council member Zahn, as council liaison to the Bellevue School Board, do you have any comments or questions?
Thank you. I did have one clarifying question. So the proposed tax rate of the $2.50 per thousand, that is for this particular.
I didn't understand.
There's already existing.
Council member Zahn, it's hard to hear you. There's some beeping going on in the background, so can you speak a little louder? Ask your question again.
Well, I will. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes? Okay.
Yes.
My clarifying question was, so the slide that talked about the tax rate of the $2.50 per thousand, that is for this particular of the $675 million only, and it's not a sum of the previous bond that is still in play, it is a separate one, is that correct?
Yes, so the current local school district taxes add up to $2.43 per 1,000. So that is currently what your local school district taxes are. The total tax rate for homes in Bellevue is $8.21 per 1,000. And that is really made up of state school taxes, local school taxes, city, county, a number of different taxes. So this bond is looking at adding 3 cents per $1,000 of AV. And so for $1 million home, that would be $30 annually. For an $850,000 home, it'd be about $26 annually. Did I answer that question?
Yes, so we're actually adding on, so the $2.50 is the all-in amount.
Yes,
46.
it'd be $2.46.
Or sorry, $2.46. Okay, thank you. That was my clarifying question.
Okay. Councilmember Lee, do you have comments or
Thank you.
questions?
Appreciate your giving us a report on what the school district is facing, what has done, and I think it's important to note the growth and so on, so on. So without, of course, following the legal counsel's advice, addressing my opinion on this, ask you a question. So I want to compliment you what you're doing. Thank you very much, Superintendent Dr. Duran. You mentioned this is the fourth phase of the capital development plan, right? So it's fourth phase. So it's an ongoing thing, really. We've been collecting money. We've been getting money to do all the wonderful things you've done. What was the original plan? Is this the final phase, or there will be other or continuing requirements that, so if you could talk about that, because
Yes.
I believe that the public would ask the question, we just raise money, then which is the fourth one, how about the fifth one, sixth one, seventh one? So it'd be good to have some understanding of what is the total plan, that we can
Right.
go forward.
So these are the last schools that we would be rebuilding, are the 3 schools. The 2 high schools that we're expanding were originally in phase 1. We did not anticipate having to do those. As I said earlier, we didn't anticipate back then having to go back and visit those. My expectation is we'd have at least one more, because we buy property now anticipating additional enrollment coming into the district, then we're going to have to put buildings on those pieces of property as needed for those students. So my anticipation would be that there would be at least one more, but then anything else really moving forward would be about ongoing growth and changes in our community. And we just need to always be looking ahead, as you do, to make sure that we have the facilities and things that we need to satisfy the educational mission for the students in the district.
So when you said fourth phase, really, it wasn't a plan that is going to do how many phases, but it's an ongoing process of seeing what the need of the school district is.
Right.
And you, in this case, you have need for it. So you come for another bond issue to do whatever you need to do. So whatever goes on in the future depends on what it's going to look
Right.
like in the future.
But this is the last of the rebuilding, so,
Okay.
because we have been tearing down and rebuilding schools, and these 3 schools are really the last ones where we're tearing the entire structure down and starting over. So this is the end of that process.
Especially the two things about it. One is completing what you started.
Right,
Okay.
yes.
And the other one is you're realizing new needs.
Yes.
And you're going to be asking for, and that will continue in the
Yes.
future, obviously. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, good question. Thank you. Councilmember Stokes.
Yeah, this is it's pretty exciting. I'd like to see this come back and have the conversation, because I have a lot of things I want to say about it. But I've been involved with every living bond campaign since 1992, and I remember vividly when it dawned on us the change was needed. So, and I'd like to bring it back, talk about that some more. But it is exciting. It's a good presentation, good factual information. And as I said, I'm looking forward to having the conversation when we can actually talk about the process or the projects.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Barksdale.
So thank you for being here and for the great presentation. Just one quick question in terms of how this bond package might affect capacity for vocational programs, especially as we continue to grow in terms of diversity. You know, there are going to be many directions that students will want to take. How does this change that at all?
So by adding some of the STEM capacities, it will add to that. So a couple years ago, we did a big needs assessment at Newport High School. The last bond package had about $10 million in it for Newport High School. And when we talked about adding classrooms, the community there said, wait, we have such bigger needs. So we stepped back and did a needs assessment. We held on to that $10 million. It's waiting for them. So this is going to add to those funds for them. But some of the areas that they need is an expansion of all of their CTE programs, from computer science and other things. The same is true at Interlake High School. So all of our different high schools do have different vocational programs, and both of those schools have an expansion of their CTA programs as part of this.
Great. Councilmember Robertson.
Thank you. Yeah, you talked about the growth of the 16,000 dwelling units. Bellevue School District doesn't have impact fees for schools, but the couple other districts that have property in Bellevue do. And what was so interesting is when they came back for their annual update, we found that their multifamily impact fees went up quite a bit because they're finding that over time, the multifamily housing is generating a lot more school students than it used to. Because as housing values go so high, people can't afford to necessarily live in a detached single family, and more families are living in the multifamily. So I hope that your forecasters are really looking at that closely, because the 16,000 units, even if a lot of them are multifamily, there definitely will be families and school children generated out of those in the years ahead. So I have the designation of being the only council member with kids in Bellevue schools right now. Jared will have one next year. Next year. 17 years I've had kids continuously in Bellevue schools. So I'm going to try to keep this pretty short. But the one I remember when Newport High School has grown so much. It was 3A school, now it's a 4A school. Somerset and Tyee also have a lot, they've already been rebuilt, but they have a lot of portables, and I'm sure a lot of the other rebuilt schools do as well. Will this bond issue address that, or is that for a future discussion?
So one of the reasons, I'll take Somerset first. So one of the reasons why we are moving Puesta del Sol from its current location at the south end to a more central location when we do the rebuild of that is to free up potential elementary space at the south end. Because Eastgate, Somerset, Newport Heights are all getting fuller, and so, but we don't really have any elementary space right now at the south end. So that's part of that effort is to work through that. The other thing that we need to continue to look at is program placement. So both Somerset and Tyee have the advanced learning program. And so that's why we are looking at program placement, and do we have the programs in the right places in order utilizing those buildings effectively.
That's great. That'd help rebalance the population so that, yeah, that's making the most of what you have.
Yeah.
That's great. And then finally, if this passes, would really look forward to participating with the school district in the aquatics partnership. That, as you know, is of special interest to me.
Let me say that the aquatics is not part of this. However, it's part of the capital and tech funds that we already have, is a way that we would look at working through the aquatics opportunities.
Wonderful. Well, I really appreciate everything that the school district has been doing to help our kids, particularly with regard to the college and the high school and things like that, that really saves a lot of parents money when the kids get to college. I have a kid that graduated Newport, graduated college in 3 years because of all the AP classes, My next high school seniors got a ton of that credit from college and the high school and AP. So I think you really do a solid service to the parents of Bellevue and the students by helping them get through college in a much more efficient way. Rather than 5 years to graduate, 3 years is a lot more affordable. So anyway, thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor House.
Thank you. Thanks for the great presentation. And Dr. Duran, thank you again for speaking at the Bellevue Essentials graduation. That was really great to hear your inspiring words there. Just a couple of quick questions on this. First, about the purchasing of land. What's your process for that? Are you looking for specific areas in the city, or is it really just where it becomes available? I'm just curious what your process is for identifying and then purchasing that land.
So I work with both a demographer and a realtor.
Okay.
And our demographer interacts with all of the different planning departments, as well as interacts with the largest employers, just to see kind of what their job growth is looking at, because it's fundamentally believed that jobs bring families. And so we want to just make sure that we continue to stay on top of what those forecasts are as well. We also work with a realtor. So basically, between the two of them, the demographer says, here's the areas where you should be looking. I have a realtor that then goes and looks for different sizes of land. They don't necessarily have to have schools on them right now. And he'll often look to, can we piece some different pieces of property together from multiple owners to create something large enough. So both of those ways are the way that we go about looking for it. But he will solicit people, knock on doors. Are you interested in selling? And sometimes we get lucky because we are the school district,
Right.
and people are like, yeah, I'd rather sell to the school district than developer A, so sometimes we get really lucky in that way.
Okay, terrific. And then my other question was just on, there's probably a lot of residents here in Bellevue that are feeling a bit of a tax burden these days, and they might think, well, the McCleary decision passed, that's that's taken care of. Why is this coming back before us? I was just wondering if you could, for those watching at home especially, understand why a levy like this is still necessary.
Yeah, so McCleary, well, it did have some resolutions for our community. It didn't solve everything. So McCleary never was meant to fund capital and construction, and even before McCleary, it didn't really fund construction. McCleary basically took some of our local levy, reduced how much that we can collect locally, and then increased the state levy. And in doing so, there were more taxes that left our area versus coming back into our area in support of schools. But McCleary also did not fully fund the educational model that we provide through the choice of our community, nor that is required. For example, special education is not fully funded. We fund a lot of different programs like music, art, our 7-period day, tutorial, all of those things we fund with those local levy dollars. And so while we can't collect as much as we used to, we still collect funds in order to be able to do those things. So McCleary was helpful for some districts, not as helpful for other districts. We're one of those districts that it was not as helpful for in comparison to some of the small rural districts and those types of things. So
Great, thank you for that.
So you've kind of answered this already, but I hear the birth rates are the lowest they've been in 30 years. So can you explain why, with that statistics, we still need to plan for so much growth in this area?
And so you're right, birth rates are dropping. Ours have been relatively flat in the Bellevue community as you look at the birth rates coming up. However, jobs bring people and bring families, and a quality school district also brings families. And so, as we look at the future of Bellevue, and I hear numbers like 40,000 new jobs, 16,000 new housing units, I see even the families that are having kids coming, more of them coming here than going to other more rural areas and that type of a thing. And so that's why we are foreseeing ongoing pupil growth.
Great. Okay, thank you. So everybody's had a chance to speak, and in the past, we have taken a position as a council, an official position on a ballot measure, like we did with the King County EMS levy and the King County Parks levy last year. And so we can decide if we want to take a collective position on this bond measure. And if we do that, it's already been explained by Joyce, the process that we'll have to go through. So if we do decide to take a position, we'll add it to next week's agenda under ordinances and resolutions and motions. So if we would like to make a motion, decide whether, would you?
I would make a motion that, to have the decision brought back to council to take a position on this levy, on the bond.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
I'd like to second that.
Okay. All right, all those in favor, say aye. Oh, sure,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. You betcha.
So, and I'm not opposed to, I'm supportive of the motion, but we are very careful about how often we take positions. Have we usually done it for the school district? I think we have. What's our history on this, Joyce?
I don't know in the recent past.
Okay.
The ones that I recall you taking a position on are the Parks levy, the EMS levy, the Best Starts for Kids, a couple of those kinds of things. I haven't had
Okay.
experience with a school levy.
Because I just can't remember either. All right, I just was curious what our traditional, what we've done. Okay, thanks.
Are there any other
Hey,
questions or comments?
I support this too, but I am speaking a bit on what Councilman Robertson mentioned here. Sometimes when you have interference from other jurisdictions, that might create some situation that can backfire on you. So we haven't asked you if you wanted us to deliberate on this issue. We have seen a lot politically, somebody get in there and it's not their business and it could backfire. And we all obviously represent the city of Bellevue. We represent the citizens that elect us. So I think we all individually have an opinion. It's our responsibility and duty. But I think the sensitivity or is advantageous or not depends on who or whatever. So that's.
Dr. Duran, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, we really would be advantageous for us. I think it's important for the community to be able to see the support, so we would very much appreciate that. Thank you.
Councilmember Stokes.
Yeah, I would like to speak in support. That's a good question. I think I noticed that a lot of times the council is very excited to talk about what a great school system we have and how important it is, and we take a lot of credit as if, on that, and that's good. I think this is, I'm trying to remember back when we first went to the bond, the big push, like you said, about 2005, somewhere in there.
Yeah, but
Well, and that came about because there was, the business community basically said, wait a minute, we have these cruddy buildings, why can't we do better buildings? Everybody else is doing that kind of, and we need to advance education in Bellevue. I think the community itself is very positive about the schools. And the other thing we get asked a lot is about council members or the city, what are you doing with the city? There's an assumption that we work together. The fact of the matter is we don't exactly. And this is an opportunity and a time where we can do that. And I think it's very positive. I'm not concerned about that. And in fact, I think the community will like that we support and work together with the schools. Because one of the things we always talk about, why Bellevue is a great place, is because it's a great school system. And this is an opportunity to help make it continue to be that.
Thank you. So Councilmember Stokes made the motion, it was seconded. It's not as detailed as the motion that was written out. Is it necessary? Well, you don't have it, that's why you don't know that. But is it important for us to speak more clearly to the motion, or is it okay to leave the motion as it was stated?
I move whatever the best language is.
Yes. The only details that were left out was it would come back on January 21st at your meeting, and that you would allow 15 minutes for a pro campaign and a con campaign, and then another 15 minutes for individual speakers
Well, I
on either
think
side.
that with the process, we have that part.
So that's just a
So your motion
clarification
is-
of your motion.
Yeah.
Okay, are we ready to take a vote? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you all very
Appreciate
much.
Okay, so the next item on the list is staff is seeking council feedback and direction on the draft 2020 state legislative agenda.
So thank you, Mayor and council members. This is something that we do every year in front of the legislature. This evening, for the sake of efficiency, I'm going to just turn it over to Joyce Nichols, our Intergovernmental Affairs Director, to review the agenda with you. And in terms of, we are looking for some direction on the part of council to bring this back at a future meeting to adopt whatever agenda that you end up arriving at this evening. So Joyce?
Yes. As Mr. Miyake said, this is one of two documents that council approves or reviews and approves every year. The first is what you have before you tonight. It's a short list of the city's priorities. This is the list of the key things that we want to accomplish during this next legislative session. And the second one is a longer policy document that is a compendium, if you will, of all the council positions over the last 20 years or so on a whole variety of legislative issues. Many will not come up in this next session. Many may never come up again because they've been resolved. But we keep track of your positions because when a bill or a piece of legislation comes forward in the legislative session, if you already have policy on record as to where council stands on that particular issue, we have our direction to either support it, oppose it, remain neutral on it, or in the case where we don't have council direction specifically, or something major has changed over the years since you last took up that issue, we bring those pieces of legislation to you in session so that you can review them and decide what position you'd like to take, if any. And this is a session that is a short session. It's only 60 days long, and I make that sound like that's a really short period of time, but compared to the 105-day session, they move right along. And tonight we have in front of you this short list, and we did a little bit of change up this year. Normally we have a 2-page listing of our council priorities. And so we thought, well, wait a minute, you have a couple of priorities on the capital section that are under discussion by council. They're two very, very critical projects for the city's future, and they present really, really good placemaking opportunities for City Council to talk about. You've already discussed those. One is the Grand Connection, and the other is the potential for a regional aquatic center or facility. We wanted to, instead of including those on the legislative agenda because we don't have an actual dollar amount that we're seeking, we wanted to find a way to introduce those projects to legislators in our conversations with them and when you're down in Olympia talking with them. So we included a 3rd page that has those projects on it and a brief description of each. And then the 4th page in the spread is the Invest in Bellevue information, which I think most of you are familiar with, and that lists the amount of tax revenue that the City of Bellevue, property, business, all of our rolled up taxes that we send to the state comes to about $1 billion in 2019 revenue to the state. The purpose of including that was to remind people that Bellevue, when they're looking where to invest state money, Bellevue's a very good investment because we have many, many areas that we return a lot of that money to the state. So that's the way we have formatted the legislative agenda, and it is a bit different than what you're used to seeing. Again, in a short session, typically what the legislature does is it tweaks the operating budget, the capital budget, and the transportation budget. Those were adopted in 2019, and the purpose of a short session mainly is to tweak those. Everything gets kicked off in December on this budget development process when the governor lays out his proposed budget. That's the starting point for each of the chambers of the legislature to begin adopting theirs. They'll hold public hearings on the governor's budget, and then they will go off and each chamber will develop its own budget. Those will come out probably mid to late February. They will tweak those. They will somehow reconcile the two and adopt those before the session ends on March 13th. So some of the things that are in our legislative agenda this year, typically what we do is the 2019 agenda, we accomplish many of the things that were on that agenda. So we take those off for 2020 and we add anything that we think that is new that's going to come up, or we refine our things. So something that we might not have been able to get approved during the 2019 session, we may decide to go back and see if we can get it this session. And that's important because all the bills that were presented in the 2019 legislative session that didn't pass or weren't approved, those are all still alive. So you're basically dealing with a very similar slate of pieces of legislation. Some of the things that we have noted, and I think it's been all over the press, so it isn't a new topic, but a couple things are going to take center stage. One of them is the transportation budget. Right now, the legislature is going to need to find or look for a way to replace the funding that has been impacted by the voter passage of Initiative 976. And if it is allowed to stand, it will rip a pretty big hole in the state's transportation budget. And so we're looking for the state to come up with and develop a significant revenue stream that is sustainable. And they will discuss that throughout the entire legislative session this year. The other two topics that are going to be very big are affordable housing and homelessness. And in the governor's proposed budget, he put in, I think, $100 million or more for affordable housing and homelessness enhancements. And that money that he's proposing to spend would come out of the state's rainy day fund. And it's not likely that the legislature would adopt that, whole cloth, but it is likely that that will certainly be discussed a lot. And the legislature may decide to take some of those key elements and find a way to fund them either with the rainy day fund money or without. Our legislative agenda is, it doesn't change a whole lot, but there are some specific refinements that we put into this year's. And we changed our transportation priorities just a little bit. One of the things is we need to have the legislature continue to focus on Interstate 405, getting the master plan projects funded so that the whole corridor is ready in 2024 for the bus rapid transit that is planned by Sound Transit. We also have all of the linkages that are needed for light rail, the East Rail Corridor. All of those projects have a big impact in Bellevue. And so we have funding requests for some of those. Our project that we have on State Route 520, where we're looking for a new interchange off of 520 onto 405 at 124th, that is one of the projects that, because of the passage of 976, has been put on hold by the governor until WashDOT has an opportunity to look at the construction funding. That's a project that received money in the Connecting Washington package in 2015, and it has done some of I think we received $41 million to begin the process, but we still need construction funding for that. So it's on hold for right now, and it's up to the legislature to figure out a way to deal with all the projects that are on hold because of 976 and discuss possibly the need for a statewide transportation funding package in the next session. If it can't happen in 2020, then it might be on deck for 2021. And that would be a place where we would be looking for significant funding, both for that interchange and for other priorities that are along 405. And that's in the legislative agenda this year. Another piece is we're looking for the state to continue working and actually do some things around smart mobility and smart technologies for transportation. Council has an interest statement that lays out your priorities about smart mobility, and we're going to be talking to legislators about how to get that going. We need a regulatory framework for the state because we don't have one, and the change is coming to autonomous vehicles and the impacts of those. We need a regulatory structure that keeps pace with the technological advancements that are out there. Another item council focused on toward the end of last year was the road usage charge. And the state, WashDOT, did a pilot project that looked at how do you replace the gas tax, which is flat, because many people are going to better mileage cars and many are going to electric vehicles. So the gas tax long-term is not going to be a sustainable source for all the transportation funding that's needed. And so this pilot project was done. You received a report on that, and in that report, you came back with feedback, and we've incorporated the feedback from that presentation into the city's legislative agenda. And while I think that will be a big topic of discussion among the legislature, I'm not sure they will come to an actual decision on whether to move forward with that replacement revenue source or keep with the gas tax and keep looking and keep working on alternative ways to fund this. Let's see. Moving to, in the interest of time and weather, I'm going to whip through the rest of this really fast. Regarding homelessness and affordable housing, our legislative agenda encourages the state to give us tools. Don't tell us that every jurisdiction has to do the same thing. Don't direct what we do. Give us tools that are usable and sustainable for us to make decisions, and by us I mean you, make decisions locally that impact our community. We don't want one size fits all. We want the ability to pick and choose, and we've included some of those options in the legislative agenda. In the homelessness section, it's quite similar to what we did last session, and what we really want to avoid is, again, this one size fits all. We don't want the state to say this is how you all have to deal with homelessness issues and how you have to shelter people who do not have shelter. We want the ability to tailor make the solutions that fit our community. And tonight we are seeking feedback on the legislative agenda. Are these priorities ones you agree with? Are they the right priorities? And we would like to get from you any suggestions you have, and then a head nod if you do make any amendments that we could make those changes and get this approved.
Great, thank
With
you.
that.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to start with myself this time because I kind of surprised myself when I was reviewing this, the legislation that you're recommending, or the legislative agenda, because I had gone over it a long time ago, and it's just the need for affordable housing seems to be just snowballing. And as light rail comes into our city in the next few years and all the development that's occurring around it, which we call transit-oriented development or TOD, I'm so worried that with that we're going to miss our moment and not get the affordable housing in these TOD regions that we really need and provide people who work in our city to live in our city, and people to live near transit so they don't actually have to have a car if they don't want to. So I started with something much more assertive and then kind of watered it down in hopes that it would be something that everybody on the council would be comfortable with. And I'm wondering, is there a way to ask that we could add in there with the affordable housing legislation to incentivize affordable housing in TOD? Affordable housing development in TOD.
We already have other tools listed in that affordable housing section, and it's always better to urge the state, again, not to tell us how to do it, but give us the tool to do it and the possible incentive to make it more likely to happen. So adding that to the affordable housing tools at the direction of the rest of council is up to you.
It's doable, though, you think, to put that in there?
I believe, yes, that is doable to put it in.
So Councilmember Robertson.
So I had a question. So I was looking at where you would put it, and I just wanted to, so if you look at the tools for affordable housing, we say Bellevue supports legislation to provide funding tools jurisdictions could consider adopting to construct and or preserve affordable housing units with a focus on a broad array of income levels, including low-income and workforce housing. Would we add it and and development of affordable housing and transit-oriented development nodes? Or where would it go?
Actually, if you look at the sentence that starts, tools may include increased funding for the Housing Trust Fund, a sales tax, da-da-da-da-da. It might be incentives to encourage affordable housing
In transit-oriented development.
Because I want to.
That's where it should go.
The language for incentives.
Right. That's where, I was just trying to figure out where it would go. Yeah, I would be supportive of adding it to where Director Nichols suggested, and greater opportunities to act locally in order to leverage state funds.
Yeah.
I think that that's a good idea. Also, when it comes back, when we adopt our MFTE to apply to any multifamily housing project citywide, that I think will help as well, so.
Councilmember Stokes. Pardon me?
What was your BHAG before you watered it down?
Mandate.
Okay.
Development of affordable housing in all TOT.
Strongly encouraged.
Well, Joyce and I talked about it, and she thought that incentivizing was a good tool, and I think it is as well. So, I mean, if you want an example of that, an example might be a decrease in property tax paid by the developer for the similar to the percentage of the amount of affordable housing units that they put in. So.
Incentives, that they give us incentives or give us tools.
Yes.
Then we can choose which tools to use.
Exactly. Any other, Councilman or Lee?
Thank you. I support what you're saying. I think it is a very important issue that we need to address. But, so by including what you said, I think it's fine. But I just want to remind everybody, emphasize what Joyce brought up to us. We want to emphasize the tools up to us. We're not asking them to allow us to do it.
No.
The key is that whatever we want to do, it's up to us to decide. We just want to have them, give us the money, but not the tools. Allow us do not interfere with us.
Right.
That's really the key.
We have
whatever
the choice
specific detail, whatever
whether
tools
to
we're
use
going
it
to
or
have,
not.
we may have more tools, or maybe have less tools, but it's up to us to develop that in our deliberation, how to accomplish our goal that this council supports. There may be others that we haven't thought about or haven't talked about or haven't agreed on, obviously. That's the key. So I think that can be left open, but I support by adding that incentive because it's already got some ideas that's included, which we already agree, but it should not be limiting just to that and asking them for permission. We don't need to ask them for permission. Right. The key is that give us the authority, the right to do whatever we want to do. That's one point. Yeah. So I don't think we need to do too much more, right? Adding one or two, you suggest, I like the suggestion.
Thank you.
Second point I want to make is, I think, oftentimes when we talk about affordable housing, we got to lump together with homeless issue, And I think I'm really glad to see that the state legislatures and many other people are recognizing now there is a difference. Affordable housing and homelessness. You need to be separate. And I think it's stated that way in the legislative agenda, which is good. Okay? So I think that's important because each city has its own priorities and whatever and challenges and problems. And we need to address it. Don't lump together. You got confused, and we're not going to get the issues resolved if we don't know what problem are we looking at. So I actually, one thing I would recommend, not to get confused is, I don't know, Joyce, you answered the question for me. Can we somehow separate it more so? I believe Bellevue is a lot more interested in affordable housing. That's the biggest challenge for Bellevue. Homelessness is important, but it should be a more clearly discussed and separated.
Councilmember Lee, can I ask you a favor? Yeah. Can we limit the discussion right now to the thing that I brought up, and then we're going to go around and talk about other...
It pertains to what you brought up.
Well, let's just speak...
You don't make your your suggestion more effective.
You
I
can
believe
add
by
to it, but I want to give
separating.
everybody a chance to comment on
Well,
this.
but that's my comment.
Well, you may
keep
want to
that in
add
mind.
more to it yourself.
Yeah, thank you. If you give me more time, that's fine.
Yes, I will.
Thanks.
Is there anybody else who wants to comment on the recommendation that I made to add to the affordable housing?
No, I'll be supportive of it as well. I
Okay,
think it's good.
so now I'm going to give you an opportunity to speak to what you would like to speak to, whether you support it as written, or if you have change in priorities, or if you want to add something. So, Councilmember Stokes, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think, I mean, we could be here for the next 2 hours wordsmithing this or commenting. I think it really sets things out in a very good way. And I don't have any concern with the interaction between affordable housing, human services, and homelessness, because they all are interrelated. But I think we very distinctly separate those things out in the good ways. I think it's a good job, and if we we could add a lot of candy on this, but I think if we focus on these things and push on those, we will accomplish a lot. So I'm very pleased with it, and I think this is a great legislative agenda, and I'm ready to start working on it.
Thank you. Councilmember Barksdale.
I support it with the change, including the TOD.
Okay, Councilmember Robertson.
Thank you. I'm likewise supportive of it. I did talk to Director Nichols about the capital budget requests. I think it would be helpful, once we know the numbers, to put in what our match is. If we have significant matching, I think that helps sell it, just to add it. If people are comfortable with that, once we have the numbers. We don't have the numbers. And I think you said that would be helpful.
When we're talking to legislators, that is a very helpful thing to have. And the match on the first priority, which is the Bridle Trails Park, we're asking for $1 million, and we are, I think our match is 1.65 million.
Yeah.
And then on the changing tables for adults in the parks restroom, we're asking for approximately $250,000. And within our parks budget, we have something called the Parks Refurbishment Fund, and our match would conceivably come out of that. So we're constantly making improvements to our parks facilities, and that fund exists for just that same purpose. So when something is needed in a park, we have funding to do it. So I can easily add those numbers or that little addition if that would be helpful.
If people find that of use, I think it helps sell it. A legislator told me to put something like that in.
Can I have a head nod if we're all okay with that? Yeah. Just to speak.
And we don't have the numbers, the exact numbers yet.
Right,
but,
I get that.
I love this part.
I know, I was just about to, so I was just about to talk about that. So I was down in Olympia, as you know, last year, I think at least 3 or 4 times. And I brought this up to every legislator I talked about. I knew we'd be at over $1 billion this year, because last year when I was there, it was 930 million or something. And this is the best sales pitch. Talks about that we give $1 billion of revenue out of Bellevue's activity to the state of Washington every year, so we're a good investment. So I think that this is a really strong ledge agenda. I really appreciated having the red line in the packet materials, because it shows how much we've accomplished. I mean, we got some big things, because we do keep it tight, we do keep it focused, and we do put our own skin in the game with the matches. The 405 master plan being the absolute number one thing that this council has pushed for a decade or more. I mean, and we're getting it piece by piece, and they're expensive pieces, but we're getting it, and keeping the local control is really important. So my question on this is whether I know that I've been talking with some of our big employers in the chamber, and that you've been talking with some of our big employers in the chamber. To the extent that their legislative agendas overlap with ours, I think it would be really great if we could deploy joint efforts on some of our big asks, going down with some of our major employers, with some of the public institutions that have things in common with us. So I assume you're doing that, yes? You're looking at theirs?
There are days, there is the Chamber Day, they have a lobby day down in Olympia, and we could certainly make sure that on that day, and I think it coincides this year with the AWC Legislative Conference that is the last, it's the Tuesday, Wednesday, last week of January. So, and I pretty sure the chamber said its day was one of those dates. And so we would be down there anyhow. Many council members typically go down for that lobby day, and we could try to put something together around that. And there are other days that happen, and those are probably the easiest to try to piggyback on, rather than setting up something that's really big that requires an awful lot of, juice to try to put together, building off what's there. So we'll get a list of who's going when. We will make that available, and we'll try to pull together some nice stakeholder groups to engage on those.
Great. Well, the other, and that's great. The other way to do it is if we're down there and we know, for example, these 2 or 3 major employers, or the UW, or has a similar thing, to mention that to the legislators and to let those stakeholders know that's on our agenda too, so that when they go in and lobby, they're mentioning it. Oh, and by the way, this is also a priority of the city of Bellevue. I think if we have that coordination, whether we go together or not, that would be really effective in a short legislative session. If they have 6 major players asking for the same thing, it's a lot more powerful.
Yes, it
so,
is.
and if we know each other is doing that, so I would encourage us to do that. So anyway, other than that, I'm happy to, I know there's more people to talk, but I'm very happy to support the legislative agenda with the 2 minor tweaks.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Zahn.
Yes, thank you. So a couple of things. On the front page, the one about incentives and progress on smart mobility. My question is, the way that that's worded, does that also include funding for pilots of shared mobility options? Because I know that we've got mine has the e-bike, and so the ability to have some funding of pilots for e-bikes for some of our low-income communities to also leverage that. So I'm just looking at the wording, whether incentive covers that or not.
I believe it does, because that's one of the talking points that we would include when we're discussing this and one of the major ways you can help out is to provide funding for some of these transit mobility options that are on the table now, being discussed by the city, by Metro, and by some of the major employers.
Do you think we need to make a change to the wording at all to include that? Say that.
I think that we're good with it the way it is, and we'll make sure our talking points include the ways in which they can help us with that specifically.
Okay, great. Councilmember Lee.
Are we talking about the whole thing?
Yes, excuse me. Councilmember Zahn, did you have more you wanted to say?
Yes, I actually did have one more item.
Okay.
And that is under the clean energy tools. In the first, I want to make sure that the way this is worded, it says Bellevue supports an accelerated transition, provided the transition does not result in negative economic impact. So the way that's worded, if there's any negative economic impact, we wouldn't support it. Or are we trying to say that Bellevue supports an accelerated transition, the negative economic impact to ratepayers?
That position has been on council's agenda, legislative agenda, for several years, and the initial intent was not to have it be just revenue neutral, because we know that that probably is not likely to happen. So you want to be able to say that the major thing that we want to avoid is those spikes for ratepayers. You don't want to have, an increase of 20% one year, flat the next, another 20% the next year. You want rates to stay as flat as possible for as long as possible. And so it's that we don't want the upheaval. And I would hesitate to say that it means any negative impact we would oppose, but we have to scale, we have to understand the scale of the potential impact on ratepayers, and that was the original intent of previous councils that put that in. If council does want to change that, then it's your choice.
Well, I'd like to propose the word to provided the transition minimizes negative economic impacts to ratepayers, so that because does not result just sounds very, it doesn't, it seems really emphatic that does not result.
Let's let's discuss that, Councilmember Barksdale.
I just had a suggestion, maybe if we frame it in the positive to meet the outcome that you just shared, Director Nichols. I don't know if that would help versus it being framed in the negative.
Yes, it's always better to put things in the positive.
How would that read?
I think the wording that Councilmember Zahn proposed would take it from potentially sounding negative to positive, which would be, the sentence would read, or the clause would read, renewable energy provided that the transition minimizes negative impacts to ratepayers, or just minimizes impacts to
I
ratepayers.
feel like it's not the role of it to minimize, it's the role to have a minimal negative economic impact
Okay.
to ratepayers. Councilmember Robertson.
So, wait, now I'm confused. Would it be, as Joyce said, minimizes negative economic impacts?
I'm recommending that we say, provided the transition has minimal negative economic impacts to ratepayers.
Oh, okay. Okay. What I was gonna,
Minimal impacts to ratepayers, as opposed to minimal.
negative, I would say negative, minimal
Yeah.
negative. I think negative should stay in. Because if it has a positive, we want it to be a maximum positive economic, I mean, right, we don't want to minimize that positive, but minimal negative. I'm comfortable with that, but my question was more for clarification, especially because we have a few council members who haven't been through the legislative session a lot of times. When we get bills, you don't just take this and start lobbying for the bills based on a discussion we had for 5 minutes in January that year. If there's a bill that has impacts, you're going to bring it to us, and we're going to be able to have a greater discussion about it and guide the lobbying efforts.
Yes.
This is a guideline, but it doesn't mean we won't weigh in more. So I just wanted to reassure folks about that in case they didn't know.
Yes.
Thanks.
And we do not freelance your positions on any bill. We are hyper careful about that
And
because
we are very appreciative.
well, you don't last long if you are going against the stated policy of your council or taking it lightly.
Are there any more comments on Councilmember Zahn's recommendation? Councilmember
I
Stokes.
think you can just put, instead of saying does not result in, just say, provided the transition minimizes the negative economic impacts to ratepayers.
I don't think it's the transition's job to minimize personally. I just think the way that's written is,
Well, then throw the whole thing out then, because that's what it says. Transition does not result in negative.
I'm comfortable with what I recommended, and we can decide which way.
How's it going to read?
Yeah, what did it say?
do you have, Joyce?
Well, I got lost. So I think what I last heard, and please help me out here, provided the transition minimizes negative economic impacts to ratepayers, or we were just saying that the impact to ratepayers be minimal. So
Results in minimal negative economic impacts was what I was recommending.
okay.
Provided the
Okay.
transition results in, as opposed to does not result in. We're making it positive.
I'm fine with the way that Mayor worded it.
It's fine, it minimizes the minimal part, but that's okay.
Okay, now I've got it.
Makes it more minimal, in fact.
Okay, any more comment on Councilmember Zahn's idea? Okay, so Councilmember Lee, it is your turn. You had a recommendation?
Yes. Under incentives, page 1, and progress on the regulatory framework, the last sentence, I would recommend to make it stronger. Funding. This, if you go to the beginning, it says the city supports the following, whole bunch of things. So I think the city.
Yeah, we're lost as to where you are.
What bullet point?
Right here.
It's on the
The top
Oh,
of the
you're
second
in
column.
you're in the action, no, he's in the,
Is that what you mean to talk about?
He's looking at the,
not?
where it says incentives and progress.
He's looking at the
looking at the marked up
legislative
language,
track
though. Yeah,
agenda,
yeah.
track changes. Okay, so on the draft,
I like the
which bullet?
discussion on encouraging autonomous driverless vehicle technology, but I want it to be a little bit more specific and stronger. I think we need to support funding and crafting or funding and policies encouraging the use of smart mobility technology, such as autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, and shared mobility options. Just as incentives and progress doesn't get us very much anyway. But we are making progress, but where? 100-year progress. I think it's important to ask the state to actually support it financially and also developing policies to make it possible for smart mobility technologies, such as autonomous driverless vehicle. This is what we need to have in order to really make a big difference, impact on our transportation system in the future. So I think we need to be more specific and get this out. It's a big deal.
Joyce, can you read what Councilmember Lee is recommending, the change? Can you read how that would be?
Yes.
And you might want to start with what it says now.
It says now, incentives and progress on the regulatory framework for the use of smart mobility technologies, including autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, and shared mobility options. And I believe Councilmember Lee is, I believe, adding to that funding, that the whole piece read with funding and policies encouraging smart mobility technology, such as smart autonomous vehicles.
Not smart, just autonomous.
Just autonomous,
driverless
okay.
vehicle.
Autonomous vehicles,
And then the rest.
okay.
So still keep electric and shared, right?
Yes, it's the same
Right.
thing. Yeah.
I'm okay with that. Does there anybody have a comment or a?
Say it again, and what do we have in the past? Is this new language, or is what we've done?
What we have had in the legislative agenda before is the sentence that is, the city is supportive of incentives and progress on the regulatory framework for the use of smart mobility technologies, including autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, and shared mobility options.
Yeah, just in the first part, yeah.
Okay, and to that is the addition that Councilmember Lee is proposing, be the opening clause of that longer sentence.
Instead of what it said, instead of the incentives and the progress.
Can you read it as he's
Yeah.
Okay.
The whole thing.
recommending?
Here's
the
a
whole
try.
thing.
So the city supports is the preamble, funding and policies encouraging smart mobility technology, such as autonomous vehicles, and then I believe electric vehicles and shared mobility options would be the way that would read. Councilmember Lee, does that get it?
That's correct.
Do you
Yes.
feel like we're missing anything if we make that change? Okay, Councilmember Robertson.
So I agree that this is something that's really important to the future of Bellevue as a tech city and as a leader. The thing that I think is left out here is, because there's funding and policies, but that leaves out incentives and regulatory framework. And those are two additional underpinnings of this, because wouldn't it be great if the legislature creates a fund that helps drive additional technology advancements, but at the same time, we want to make sure that the regulatory environment is such that they're not, that it's safe, that they're not misusing data, that, I mean, there's a whole lot more to this than just funding and policies. So I would be supportive of adding funding and policies as long as we don't lose incentives, including incentives and
Progress.
and regulatory framework.
Okay.
I don't mind doing that at all, but I'm just saying that whatever incentive, progress, it's just words. But if you want to keep it there, that's fine. It's nice to make it fluffy. But most important thing is funding and develop policies.
Okay.
Otherwise,
I
it's
think
just
that's
nice.
a good change. I think it's wise to keep in the need to have incentives and a regulatory framework, because we're missing the regulatory framework right now. So combining those into one
Development
statement,
policies can establish regulatory frameworks. That's what the policies are for.
yes.
Without policy, nothing matters. Thank you.
So Joyce, can
I don't mind including it, that's fine.
The
Yeah.
legislature comes up with regulatory framework, so that's what we're pushing for.
Excuse me. Okay, so Joyce, let's read back what we have now with the addition to what we've already
Okay.
written.
City supports funding and policies encouraging smart mobility technology such as autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, and shared mobility options. And then some clause that says, as well as incentives and progress on a regulatory framework.
I'm
So
good.
for these technologies. So it's, I think.
I'm good.
Yeah, for the use of these smart mobile. Okay.
I thought I heard something from.
You did, but I'm gonna.
Oh, okay.
Does anybody, Councilmember Stokes, did you have a comment?
No, I think that's fine. As long as I get.
I think it's good.
Okay,
Two things.
Councilmember Zahn, did you have a comment?
I did, because when I brought up adding funding, what we talked, that the way it was originally worded actually did include that. So are we only adding policy, or are we actually interpreting the sentence differently now?
We're adding funding and policy. That's it. We're adding two things, funding and policies.
So when Joyce reads it back to us, does it sound like something you support, Councilmember Zahn? Let's hear Joyce's reading of it again.
Okay. Funding and policies encouraging smart mobility technology, such as autonomous vehicles, and then we flip back up to electric vehicles and shared mobility options, as well as incentives and progress on the regulatory framework for the use of these technologies.
There you go. So I'm seeing head nods for that. Councilmember Zahn, are you comfortable with that change?
Yeah, I'm just checking, because when I brought up funding before, I was told the sentence actually already included that, and so it wasn't needed.
Well,
but it sounds like now you're saying that it's needed, and so we'll
Where's it
put those
included?
words
I don't
in.
see anything included anywhere.
Anyway, sounds like that's a head nod from Councilmember Zahn, and I think we have one from everybody else at the table here. So let's go ahead and put that in.
Okay.
And then Councilmember Lee, did you have
another
another
one? Yes, please.
comment?
Yeah. The other one is in the capital, page 4, capital budget request.
So he's on the strike version,
The strike
just so you
version,
know, the
yeah.
draft. So page.
I don't want to take time to compliment how good it is to have the red version, red lines. That's great, thank you. Anyway, I like the idea of having this added potential future capital transportation funding request. Okay, but I do have a couple of comments. One is, I think this is a great thing to include, and I like the thing that's included, but I think it's a little bit too narrow and is maybe missing a few things. And I don't want to have us just, narrowly defining what is the future, and we might miss a few other things. I'd like to have it broader, okay? When we talk about, these things include a Grand Connection and Regional Aquatic Center, they are great. To me, I think they are place-making facilities. Really, that's important. I like to use them as examples, but I don't want to say that these are just the only thing that we want. Because that may exclude other things. And also the description of it, may be, again, narrowing to what specifically can be potentially we're looking for as a potential vision. So I would like to use something. I don't mind including these as examples, but I think we need to say something about the overall placemaking facilities that's important to Bellevue. We just heard from the Bellevue School District about all the facility. They're going to raise $675 million. Doing what? Building facilities to accommodate the people, culture. People can do things. Building robotics, learning, experiencing, doing things. And they're willing to go and raise $675 million. And these are the things that we want to build for our people, our community, our residents.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
If we put in the title, potential future capital, transportation, and placemaking funding
Yes.
requests, would that satisfy?
I am happy with that.
Okay, are we all good with that? Because I think that's a really good point. Okay, do we have a head nod from Councilmember Zahn on that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, good. All right, so are there any more, Deputy Mayor Newenhouse?
Yes, thank you. Two quick things. On that same point, actually, I was just wondering, because these are things that we most likely will ask for next year, right, Joyce? So I was just wondering if we should be specific and say potential 2021 capital, transportation, and placemaking funding requests, just to know that we are coming back with this next year and already, I want them to be thinking about it already, or is that being too?
Well, I think the reason that we picked future was because we anticipate talking to them we're not going to get the funding for either of these projects in the next year. I think that's absolutely correct.
Okay.
I'm not sure that we should single out 2021 because
Okay.
we'll probably be going to them in 21, 22, 23.
Okay, fair
I
enough.
think it's going to be a longer term partnership, collaboration, and it won't just be the state. We're going to be working with regional,
Okay.
local, state, and federal.
Fair
And I think this is the way we start the conversation about where we're going in the next few years.
Okay. Fair
We
enough.
could say 2021 and beyond,
Okay.
or
Can I
future.
comment on your point there? Because I think what he's saying is, could we be a little more bold with this? And the potential thing really rubs me the wrong way. How iffy are we about this
Exactly.
future
Yeah.
request? Could we take potential out and just say future capital?
Yeah, I want them knowing this
do
is
that.
coming. Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay.
So it's the difference between staff and council boldness. So
Yeah.
I like
May I
that.
ask the question? When you mention potential, do you have any questions about these budgets? Are these budgets unanimous or approved by the city as priorities for the future?
It's meant to be potential funding request to the
Well, you used the word potential again. Anything can be potential.
No, look,
I can throw in
we
10
agreed to
projects
strike
as a
it.
potential. So why aren't they
Good
included?
point. Yeah.
Well, they're both on our council priorities.
Right.
So
Yeah.
to me,
And
that's.
before they go on the
What's on the-
legislative
well,
agenda,
lots
we'll
of
go
things
through
on
a
the council
process.
Haven't we agreed to strike potential?
Well, lots of things on the council
Okay.
priorities.
Why are we still talking about it?
Well, okay. So, Councilmember.
No, thank you.
I mean, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you.
Newenhouse, forgive me. I'm
It's okay.
in a rut here.
And Joyce, thank you so much for your work on this. This is great. And I thank you for bringing this a little earlier as well. I believe it's a little earlier than in previous, am I correct, or about a little bit?
About this.
Anyways. And I'm so glad that Councilmember Robertson and Mayor Chalmanek went down and lobbied for the bonding and tolling of 405, because in this climate right now, we would just never get this, as previously discussed. So I'm so glad we did that earlier and not this year. Last comment that I had was on the RUC on page 1, last bullet, because I think we've had a couple of presentations on that, and I think the preceding bullets about privacy concerns, which I think a lot of us brought up, and the regressive or potentially regressive, how that can penalize low-income people. But the last bullet is really speaks to the 18th Amendment, correct? Yes. I would love to see if we can make that just a little bit stronger, because I feel the rest of the bullets are fairly strong, and this one is almost, please consider using this revenue for transportation projects, which really what it should be used for. I would advocate that we just make this a little bit stronger, maybe just by saying just that, strongly consider the use of new revenue for the same purpose per the 18th Amendment as the tax it replaces, if my colleagues are comfortable with that.
Which one we are looking at?
Okay, any comments on
Affordable
what
housing.
Deputy Mayor Newenhouse has
Last bullet under
recommended?
legislation.
Yeah, I just have a
Councilmember
question
Stokes?
is whether we could actually, that's, is that totally accurate that that's the limitation, or that the limitation is that specific? I mean, there's a good debate on that.
There is a debate that's happening on that, which is why, and different people interpret things differently. But the debate's happening over if the gas tax goes away, does the 18th Amendment go away?
Right.
Because the 18th Amendment speaks to the uses of the gas tax, the motor vehicle fuel tax specifically. And so the debate is, if you're going to a completely different tax, you're getting rid of the gas tax, then what are the uses of that funding, which the Constitution of the state doesn't speak to right now. And so the thought was, and again, open to any comments on this to change it, the thought was that if you're going to expand beyond the 18th Amendment uses of the gas tax, if you're going to open this to other kinds of uses of those funds, that the legislature should consider expanding the amount of money available. Because if the current gas tax isn't meeting all the needs, and you go to a tax that raises a similar amount of money, and you expand the uses, something's got to give in that equation. So the pot should grow, was the thought, if you're going to fund things that are not funded now. Because all of the uses depend on having good roads. You need roads for buses, you need roads for bikes, you need trails for bikes. You need all of these infrastructure pieces in order to make it work right. So if you expand it without expanding the total amount of dollars, you have created a bigger pinch than we have right now.
So what if it were to be reworded, and tell me if this reflects what your wish, and I don't know if this is a good idea, but legislation that ensures new revenue sources continue to be used for the same purposes as the tax it replaces. Does that reflect what you're trying to get?
Say that again?
Legislation that ensures new revenue sources continue to be used for the same purposes as the tax it
Yes.
replaces.
Ensures it'll be stronger than considers. I'd be fine with that.
So Joyce, what is your feedback on that?
If you would say that again, legislation that ensures new
New
revenue.
revenue sources continue to be used for the same purposes as the tax it replaces. Does that make sense?
That's
Yeah.
the first sentence there, yeah.
I'm more
That-
comfortable with that.
That does make sense.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I would
Great.
point out that the Transportation Commission recommended to the legislature that it do exactly that.
Okay,
Oh,
So,
great.
yeah,
so it's
that's,
consistent.
Okay, good.
it's consistent with their recommendation, and they were the ones overseeing the study.
Yep.
So, and as we know, the reason that this is being considered is the gas tax is not providing enough revenue for the roads and bridges and everything that we have. So we certainly want to make sure that we do not just, that if we're replacing it, that we truly replace it.
Exactly.
And I'd like to replace it and grow it for that,
Yes.
because we really need it.
Absolutely.
So I'm very comfortable with that change. Thanks.
Any other comments or on that? Council Member Zahn, do you have any comments on that recommendation from Deputy Mayor Neuenhuis?
I'm fine.
Okay,
Great.
all right, so
Go.
I guess what we're going to think about doing is see if there's a consensus to include the changes that we've recommended on the state legislative agenda, and bring this back on our consent calendar. Is that something that you need us to vote on?
A vote would be wonderful.
Okay.
And if you were to say something along the lines of, you approve it as amended.
Yeah.
Because you have given us amendments that we would incorporate, and we would bring that back. But as amended, approval would be really good.
Okay.
Would get us
Member
moving.
Robertson.
I have a question. So we can't adopt this tonight? Because, I mean, session opened today.
Right.
So
You can. You can adopt it
I
tonight.
I think we should
as
adopt it
amended.
tonight.
I like that idea.
Okay, so
love
so
it.
I move that we adopt the 2020 state legislative agenda with the revisions that we talked about tonight, which are in the smart mobility section, the last bullet of the RUC charge section, the addition of incentives for affordable housing and TOD to the tools for affordable housing section, the change to the clean energy tools, which makes it has minimal negative impacts, or however we worded that, and the information with regard to the matches under the 2020 capital budget request, and the change of the title, removing potential and adding placemaking under future major projects.
Second.
And I was going to add, and other changes as noted, because we might have missed something.
If I did, yes.
Yeah.
But I don't think I did.
Are you comfortable with that, Joyce?
I am.
Okay,
Yeah.
we've had a motion, it's
would
been
say.
seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, terrific.
Good, thank you.
Thank you, Joyce.
I want to thank my fellow council members for this robust discussion. I think that was really productive and really helpful, and I appreciate the participation. And Joyce, thank you. I believe that that is the end of our agenda. The meeting is adjourned.